Hi everyone, and welcome to Think Outside the Board. This is a first impressions video for Waste Knights 2nd edition, and it is published by Galacta. Now, Galacta is a company out of Poland. As far as I can tell, Waste Knights is their very first production that they've done on their own, as well as their very first Kickstarter. Now, Waste Knights was designed by Marek Mydal and Paweł Suzuik, and it is got a bunch of artists on it. The best well-known among them is probably Bartek Fedacek, who has worked on Vindication, Flotilla, and Seastead, which is interesting because I'm also filming a first impressions video today on Seastead. So I guess Bartek Fedacek is the crossover here between those two games. Now, Waste Knights is for 1 to 4 players. It's medium heavy. Your average scenario plays in about an hour and a half to 3 hours. It's a narrative, exploration, storytelling game. It's a cooperative game generally, but one of the scenarios is competitive. So there's a scenario that you can play competitive. Other than that, it's cooperative. It's got dice rolling, pick up and deliver, and some hand management. You're dealing with various kinds of cards and making some choices in cards. And you've got miniatures in the game. You've also got variable player powers. So each of the characters that you can use has differences and different abilities. Now, just a little disclaimer, this is not a full teach and review video. It's just a short first impressions video. So I'm going to show you just enough of the mechanics of the game to hopefully give you an idea if this is something that is going to appeal to you and potentially be worth a purchase for you, as well as my thoughts on it after playing it a couple times. I've played a cooperative game with my fiancée Kristen, and I've played one of the solo scenarios. So let me show you some of the game and its mechanics, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. Okay, so first you see the box here. I really like the box. I think the cover art is pretty nifty. Just wanted to show you this very quickly. So this is the insert for the box. It actually works really well. It fits everything really, really well. And so the bigger cards go in here, the smaller cards go in here. It's got some space here for the vehicles, little vehicle mats, and then baggies of things. And then there's several different instruction booklets that'll go on top, and then the board, and everything fits really well. There's also these 2 trays of miniatures, and then here are some others as well. And I really like these miniatures. And like a lot of games, this game has these rings, so you're gonna put the base on your character, and then there are a few other things in a similar color that will, like tokens and such, that you'll be using throughout the game. But I like these miniatures. I think they're pretty good. They have a lot of detail. They're different than a lot of other miniatures just in their design. This is the miniature for the kind of big end game boss, sort of. But I like these. These are cool. And they work really well, and they fit really well in the box. And again, everything about this insert is just really well designed and works really well with the game. Okay, so there are a bunch of different manuals and books that come with the game. These are the most important ones. This is the Kickstarter guide, which will basically show you everything that kind of came in with the game that were like little extras. And so, there's little kind of mini expansions that do different things. This is one, that's another one, that's another one. There's a few others. So this one, Call of the Waste, adds these landmark cards to the game, and it will actually make these scenarios longer, but it will lower the difficulty. This one over here is just very specific. It was like a stretch goal. It's sort of an additional scenario that made it into the game, and it features the Rise of the Red Lord miniature and that scenario. So this is just specific to that. It's an extra scenario that was added into the game. This one, Remnants of Civilization, will also make the scenario longer. You'll add in certain things like these city task cards. In this case, it will actually increase the difficulty of the game, whereas this one decreases the difficulty, but both of them make the game longer and add in a few more mechanics. This also adds in a few more mechanical things that are used in a scenario called Spreading the Corruption. Now, if we go over here, Through the Waste, this will add in a new character and some more mechanics that will make the scenarios longer and more complex, but they will decrease the difficulty. So this might be a good scenario to use if you're like a Eurogamer, you want sort of a chunkier game. It'll also make the game a little easier, but it'll make it more complex mechanically. And then you've got Dogs of War, which added in 2 more characters, some stuff for them, and just kind of like some extra stuff in general. And then there's Scavenger, who was another character that got added on. So those are your basic things. And if you look in here, it'll help you, like when you first buy the game, kind of separate everything out so you know where everything goes. Now, you're also going to have this book right here, which is the Book of Tales. So this game is generally an exploration game. A lot of times, you'll be doing something in the game and it'll refer you to a specific paragraph. This book is divided up by different chapters. So each chapter is a different scenario, and then there are entries for that chapter. So if you do something in the game, you might come here, you might read a passage, and then might have to do some kind of a test or get some resources. I mean, you could compare it to certain like Arkham Horror games or Forgotten Waters or some of the Ryan Lawcat games like Above and Below, Near and Far, Sleeping Gods, things like that. So this is the big Book of Tales that you will need for all of your little kind of choose your own adventure type entries. Then over here we've got this guidebook which lists all the scenarios, okay? And they list them by player count, difficulty level, the amount of time it's supposed to take, and they're just different ones here in this book. Now there are 8 scenarios in this book. There is a solo scenario that is easy. There are several 2 to 4 player scenarios. There is an easy, a medium, and 2 advanced. And those 5 scenarios make up the kind of base game before they started to add on Kickstarter extras. So the Kickstarter campaign added on 3 more scenarios, an additional 2 to 4 player scenario that is medium, an additional 2 to 4 player scenario that is easy, and then a 2 to 4 player scenario that is advanced and is a competitive scenario. So all of the other scenarios in the game are you play cooperatively. This one scenario that was a stretch goal called Deadly Cargo, you are playing a competitive game. So it almost makes this, again, this is a sort of like a post-apocalyptic game. It's set in Australia. So the competitive game almost makes it into like Wasteland Express Delivery Service or something like that. But you've got 8 scenarios, and here is the cool thing about these scenarios. So for instance, this is the 2 to 4 player easy scenario. And as you're playing the scenario, you'll kind of read the beginning. There's setup here. And then you're gonna go and you're gonna do you're gonna answer these questions, and how you answer them will determine which half of the scenario you're gonna play. So you'll either end up doing Dampier Road or you'll do Fremantle. And then the way this scenario works is you're trying to go to certain locations on the main board and interact with different plot tokens. And as you do that, you'll get certain things filled out here, certain letters, certain numbers that you'll complete, and then you'll get to a certain point where you can forward to the next part of the scenario. And when you do that, you're going to make more choices, and that will determine whether you go to this side, the southern approach, and you deal with this map, or you go to the northern approach and you go and you deal with this map. So right there, even though this is one scenario, you can play the first part, Dampier Road, and then either go to southern or northern. So essentially there's kind of 2 different versions of this scenario here, depending on if you do this and then go to either one of these. Or you could go to this part, Fremantle, and do this, and then go to either one of these. So even though that was one scenario, it basically has 4 different ways you could play it, because there's 2 different part 1s and 2 different part 2s. So if you mix and match those, you're going to end up with 4 different ways to do this scenario in the scenario itself. And all of the scenarios are like this. The more complicated they get, the more they have, like this one, the more they have several different breaking points and several different kind of branch points that can send you to different parts of the scenario. So, this one has several more of these branching points. But anyway, you're going to have all the scenarios in here, and I like the fact that there are 8 scenarios in the game. I like the fact that you can play some of them solo, most of them solo. One specifically is designated for solo, so you play that with one character. But the other 2 to 4 player scenarios you can play as a solo player, just double-handing it, playing 2 characters. So you've got a solo option. You've got more solo options when you double hand it. And then you've got your cooperative scenarios and you've got a competitive scenario. But I like the fact that even within those scenarios, there are more variances within the scenarios itself to make those scenarios different every time you play them. And then I just wanted to show you some of these character boards. So you're going to be choosing a character, and you have all these different character boards you can choose from. So here you've got Alinta, the Spirit Warrior. Here you've got Johnny Taylor, the Trailblazer. He kind of looks like Robert Rodriguez, the film director. You've got Warrigal, the Mercenary. Nellie Thompson, the Stalker. So you've got a lot to choose from here. He looks like something out of like Resident Evil or something like that. And some characters on here are even kind of little homages to other characters in other post-apocalyptic themed games. Like this guy, Logan Harris. He is basically Mad Max. So that's kind of cool. You got some cool stuff like that. So when you're playing the game, you're either going to take a character randomly or you'll just pick one out. And you'll also get a vehicle, and you've got all these vehicles to choose from. So you've got lots of different combinations between the various vehicles and the various characters. And I think Mad Max's car is in here as well too. You've got this one as a camel with like a machine gun on it. And the interesting thing is all of these vehicles have space to bring gas. Obviously, the camel doesn't need gas, but it still has space for the gas. So you can use the gas for other things. Instead of spending gas to make this go further, you can actually do damage to the camel to make him move more, which is pretty sadistic. Anyway, you're going to take a character, you'll take some kind of vehicle, and then you'll get some starting cards. They're all of these upgrade cards, okay? There's like a million of these things. Now, you're going to take certain ones that are specific to your character. Now, these 5 are for Alinta, and I know because they all have her picture in the side. And these will be things that you'll be able to buy during the game as you progress on this progress tracker. And then whenever you hit one of these dark colored things, you'll be able to spend some of your points to upgrade things. You may be able to buy her special upgrades. There are also these generic upgrades in the game, which just have the upgrade symbol on them, so anyone can get these. And most upgrades have like a less powerful side and a more powerful side. So, if you get the less powerful one later on, you can upgrade it again to the even more powerful one. And then there are also these kinds of cards, which remind me a little bit of Arkham Horror. So instead of having sanity and health, you're going to have health, which relates to your character. And if you completely lose your health, you'll go unconscious, taking one of these cards. And instead of having sanity like in the Arkham Horror games, you're going to have basically health for your vehicle. And you can lose your health on your vehicle and wreck your vehicle. And if that happens, you'll take one of these cards. But I like the whole system. I like the way everything kind of works together. I like the health system and the various cards for the vehicle and for you. I like the upgrades, and there are different ways to get gear in the game as well. Now, you're going to start with a couple of items, and also in that scenario book I was showing you before, they do talk about certain quick start characters and items. So one of them for Alinta is you're going to take her, you'll take the bike, and you'll take these 2 items. So she'll have a weapon, the barbed wire club, and she'll have some armor, the vest. And the armor basically goes here, right there, and you can hold 2 things in hands. The barbed wire club is a one-handed weapon. If it was a 2-handed weapon, there'd be 2 icons. You can equip a total of items with 2 different hands on them. So I can equip one other one-handed weapon, or I could equip a 2-handed weapon. For instance, this weapon right here, the cleaver, that would be a 2-handed weapon for her. So you'll get your character. You can either pick your own stuff, or you can do the quick start options. And you'll get some starting resources. So I do like the tokens here. I like these, little gas cans, which will, go on your vehicle like this. And this is artillery that you'll get at certain points in the game. These little artillery you can use in guns. And there's medicine. And these are just nice little plastic chunky pieces. You're also going to have these tokens in the game, which will be used for things like radiation, which will go down here on your player mat. There is vehicle damage, which could affect your vehicle, and there's damage which can affect you, and poison as well. But I like the way all this stuff works together. You'll also have these chunky dice you'll be rolling during combat. Different colored dice will be used for different weapons. Generally, whites are the lowest, and then greens, and then blues, and then reds, and they all have, different icons on them. The reds have a triple hit on one side, so as you get more powerful weapons, they'll use different colored dice and more powerfully colored dice. Okay, so this is what the main board looks like, and it's obviously Australia. It is got these hexes. It's a hex grid. Here's my miniature who's going to start in New Sydney for this particular scenario, which is the solo scenario. A lot of the scenarios use these plot tokens, and they'll go down in certain hexes that are specific to the scenario. And then when you get to that space, you can do a special action called a plot action, and it will send you to the storybook, and you'll read a paragraph about what's going on in that hex. And if it's a plot token like this, so that it's specific to that scenario, usually it'll have some story elements, some text specific to that scenario. Maybe you'll find something out, you'll find an item, you'll get information or something like that. And usually that will then send you to the scenario book where you'll be able to cross off a number or a letter, and it'll be sort of a checklist of a criteria that you may or may not have completed by the end of the scenario. And that will determine what happens at the end of the scenario. So in this game, the plot tokens are in these spaces. This is also a good place to keep the combat dice until you need them. And over here, you've got a deck of item cards. These are things that you might be able to find lying around in the desert. Now, you can see there's 4 different kinds of terrain here. You've got highway, which are the roads. You've got desert, which is the sand. Then you've got this scrub area, and you've got these mountains. And then lastly, you've got these areas here, which are unpassable. So you can't go through these areas. But the other areas you can go through, and they have a different number of movement points attached to them. So when you're doing your movement, that will depend what kind of terrain you're moving through. And you've also got your round tracker down here. And you've also got this up here, which talks about the different types of terrain, the different things you might find around here on the board, like threats or radiation or contamination over here. And what you're doing in the board will vary from scenario to scenario, but generally what you're doing is you're moving around, you're exploring, and occasionally getting into combat and trying to make it through to the end of the scenario so that you can beat it. Now, on your turn, there's a few different things you'll be able to do. You can either move, and moving will depend on what kind of vehicle you have. There'll be a certain number of movement points on it, which is, you can see right now with the bike. The bike has 5 movement points, which is a lot, but it's a bike, so it's fairly agile. And then when you're moving, as you can see it printed over here, moving through one of these highway areas will cost you 0 movement points. The desert will cost you 1, and the scrub and the mountains will cost you 2 each. But that's one thing that you can do on your turn. You can move. You can also do either a camp action or a city action. So if you're out here somewhere in, kind of the outback, you can do a camp action. So camping out here, anywhere in the wilderness will allow you to heal, repair your vehicle, use various effects, or upgrade your character. And you can also upgrade your character at the end of any round. But you can also do it during the camp action. The city action, which you can only do in any of these big city places, is kind of like the camp action. There's a bunch of things you can do, and it's more powerful. So you'll be able to heal, except you'll be going to a quack doctor. You can repair your car, but you'll be going to a shop. So in both cases, they will either heal you or repair your vehicle a little better than you would be able to do alone out in the outback by yourself. You can also go to the workshop. So if you've had an item that is broken, you'll be able to flip it over and unbreak it. And you can go to a stall to try to get more gear. So when you go to a stall to get gear, you're going to take 3 cards from the bottom of this deck and just kind of blind draw them, and then you'll be able to buy them if you have the money to buy them. The idea is that you've kind of gotten them after they've been scavenged from, the outback, and when you get them, they're in a broken state because these are scavenged items, and so then it's up to you to then repair them later. You can also, if you're in a place like this with a plot action, you can do a plot action, which is going to be specific to that plot and that scenario. You could do a character action or a special action. You could also pass if you don't want to use one of your actions, which generally you don't want to pass, but maybe you're kind of waiting something out, something in the board state. But the most important things that you can do in this game are exploring and moving. So when you're exploring, you're going to draw from this exploration deck, and you'll be in some area and you'll just draw this, and then you'll get whatever is on the part of the card that corresponds to the terrain that you're in. So if you were in a desert space, you would get to do this thing, which is that you get a fuel can, but you also have to place a threat marker in your space, which could be bad later. But generally, exploring is a good way to find resources that you're scavenging out there in the wilderness. And then the other thing that happens is when you're moving, you're going to spend a certain number of movement points to move a certain number of spaces. And then whenever you finish your movement, you're going to draw from one of these 2 decks, depending on which sort of terrain you're in. So you'll flip it over. Okay, so when you pull one of these cards, it might be an enemy like this one. It could be an encounter card like this one. And in this case, you're going to go to your scenario and find out what that means in that scenario. But generally, you want these encounter cards with the letters on it, and it'll allow you to fulfill different criteria in your scenario. Or you could have something like this, where it's just a story event that you immediately have to resolve. Now, if it's something like this, if it's an enemy, you're going to go into combat. So let me show you how combat works. So I'm going to show you combat in just a second, but before I do, I wanted to show you a little bit more of this player mat. So this is a game with variable player powers, which means that every player is going to be a little bit different. They're going to have different skills. So for Alinta the Spirit Warrior, you can see, which weapons she can use. Over here, she has this ability. Her camp ability allows her to repair her vehicle up to 2. And she has a little bonus ability here that says you may spend any number of meds to heal 3 wounds or 1 radiation for each med spent. So that's just her little extra things she can do when she repairs. Then you've got something specific about her exploration. So she's an exploration of 3. And it says you may spend up to 1 fuel to gain +1 exploration until the end of this action. So these are just variable from character to character. But if we had her in the very beginning of the game, if we were just starting, out here I've got the upgrades, which I don't have access to these, but they're here if I'm going to upgrade later. I've got my character, I've got my vehicle, and I've got her starting equipment. So if I had just moved in the beginning of the game, I would still have my, my starting resources, 2 ammo, 2 meds, and 2 fuel. So if I moved very start of the game and I encountered this guy, the Tasmanian Devil, here's how combat would work. So the first thing you would do is you would take a look at this Tasmanian Devil to see if he has any threat, and he does. He has 2. So you would draw 2 tokens from this bag. Now the tokens are double-sided. So there's a yellow side and a red side. You may be drawing from the bag when you're doing different things around the board, kind of exploring the world. When you do that, you'll use the yellow side. In combat, you will use the red side. So I would have to deal with these 2 tokens when I'm resolving combat. This one would mean that my enemy has an extra health. And this one means that my enemy will re-roll all blanks once. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to check and see if the enemy has an ambush ability, in which case the enemy will attack first. The Tasmanian Devil does not. So then you'll check and you'll see which, whether you and or the enemy is attacking ranged or melee. So right now at the start here, Alinta has a club, which means she's melee. But the Tasmanian Devil, as you can see, he is ranged, so he's going to attack first. So you would take your, as designated on here, your white and your green die, and you'd roll them. The enemy here has 2 health, but he has 3 because we had that 1 token that increased his health by 1. So you would roll. So you would roll a green and a white for him to attack. In that case, he's going to hit me twice. I should have rolled the blank an extra time, so in this case it would have stayed the same. So I would take 2 wounds here, which is okay because I have 7 health. So right now I still have 5 health left. Now if I wanted to, I could use this armor and I could break this armor to prevent up to 2 damage. Now when you break an item, you just flip it over and then it is no longer as powerful, and you have to repair it for a certain number of repair points if you want to fix it. But I could have just used that and broken that, and then I won't have taken that damage. Then it would be my turn to attack. And as you can see, I've got a melee weapon here, this barbed wire club. I roll 2 green dice, and I have a little note that says, once per combat, you may re-roll any of your dice. If you do, break this card after combat. So that again would get flipped over. It would be a less powerful version of the club because now it's broken, so you would roll white dice instead of green. And then you would be able to repair it with 1 repair to get it back to the nicely working barbed wire club with the green dice. And in either case, you can always sell this for 1 money. So I would take 2 green dice and I would roll that. And in this case, I'm going to hit for 3. Which, remember, he has 3 health because of that upgraded token. Because I did 3 damage to this Tasmanian Devil, who had 3 damage because of his upgraded health, I would kill him, and then I would get this reward, which in this case, that is an item card. So I get to take an item from that stack of item cards, and I'd have a new piece of gear. If you fail to defeat the enemy during that first round of combat, that's it. So combat doesn't kind of keep going on until someone dies. It's just that the enemy will attack and then you'll attack. And if you kill it, you get the rewards. If you don't, it goes away. And then you'll just be left with whatever damage the monster did to you. So that is how combat works. So most of what you're going to be doing in this game is moving, exploring, and taking those plot actions. And again, whenever you finish your move, you're going to draw a card from the appropriate deck. And that's going to lead to either dealing with an enemy, resolving an event card, or resolving one of those encounter cards with the letter on it. And those cards with the letter on it, you want those. Those are good things. Resolving those, as well as the plot tokens that are around the board, that in general is how you're going to progress and win the game. And when you're sort of out of resources, you can take one of those explore actions that'll generally get you more resources. And then if you're really in trouble and you need to heal or fix your vehicles, you can do that with either the camp action or the city action. But that's generally the game: exploring, moving, dealing with the cards, dealing with combat, and reading those plot actions and making your choices, choose your own adventure style. So in the world of these storytelling games, you've got quite a breadth of games to choose from. I mean, you've got things like The Seventh Continent and Gloomhaven that have a lot of mechanics involved. There's definitely a story there. In Gloomhaven, the story isn't as important. In Seventh Continent, it definitely is. The game itself is very kind of punishing, and it's long and campaigny. You've got stuff like Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. That's also very kind of story heavy. The Ryan Lawcat games like Above and Below and Near and Far, and the new one, Sleeping Gods. And then you've got games like Forgotten Waters, which was put out by Plaid Hat last year, and that is very similar to this in that it's also a scenario game, and it's primarily about the stories. And so you can play through those scenarios in that game. I think there are 5 of them in the base game. You can play through them multiple times with different characters and maybe do different things each time you play it. There's also games like the Chronicles of Crime series and the Time Stories series. And those games are both definitely telling a story, and they do have mechanics involved. But it's all about the player. It's about your choices. It's about what you do. Now, Waste Nights does have some kind of gameplay, standard gameplay in it, like the pick up and deliver element. But for the most part, you really are, you're moving around the map, you're trying to hit these plot tokens, and you're going through this storybook and you're making choices, and that kind of affects the branching narrative of your story and what may or may not happen throughout the story and at the end in the finale. Now, there's 8 scenarios in this game. It started with 5, and then through Kickstarter stretch goals, they added in 3 more. So there's a total of 8 scenarios now. One of them is solo only, one of them is competitive, and the other 6 scenarios, I guess, are for 2 to 4 players. They're cooperative scenarios, and they range from easy through medium to difficult. So you've kind of got 3 different difficulty levels, and you can choose which one you want to play, maybe depending on who you're playing with and what characters you're playing, but you've got some choices. And as I tried to illustrate, within the individual scenarios, there are branching paths. And that, I think, is where the game really shines, because you don't just have 8 scenarios to choose from. You have 8 scenarios that are going to kind of branch within each scenario. So if you've got, let's say, 4 different branching paths in one scenario, I'm not talking about the part where you're reading in the lore book, making a choice and then something happens. I'm talking about those bigger choices within the scenario. So this game is very smart in that it'll give you sort of like an A scenario and a B scenario within the scenario. And then at the end of that A or B, a lot of times you'll be able to choose whether you want to go to C and D or E and F. So you've got this kind of winding pathway. So you could play a scenario multiple times and not do the same thing ever. Or at least the area of repetition will be kind of different from game to game. So, if you're doing section A over here in one game, and then maybe you make a choice and you go over here off to this path and you do D, and then once you get done with that little story section, you kind of move over here and you pick, H. You're going to be kind of like changing up what you're doing in these branching story paths. So I think rather than just having 8 scenarios in the game, you have a lot of variability within each scenario. And you've got all those characters to play. And there are even sort of within the little lore book, when you're going through and you're making choices, some of those options will depend on what character you're playing. So there'll be certain story paths that open up to you depending on which characters you're playing and giving you even more variability. I have not played Forgotten Waters yet, although I do own it, so I can't compare it to that one. I don't know how it really measures up in terms of another scenario game. But let me just speak towards this one. So I really like the post-apocalyptic Australian setting, and I think the art in this game is really amazing, from the card art to the board, and just different things in the various kind of manuals and stuff. It very much sets the scene. I was also a little worried about the writing, I think, because if you've pledged any games that are kind of produced in Eastern Europe, often there can be a translation issue where it's just not translated very well into English. So either it doesn't make sense or it's kind of clunky. And that's not the case here, which is pretty impressive for a first-time publisher publishing this kind of like their English version. Not only is it not an issue, but the writing itself is very detailed and sharp. It's got a lot of humor. Some of it's sick, but it very much fits the setting. And there's a lot of smartness and cleverness to the writing. There are occasional sort of clunky grammar issues because of the translation, but they're minimal. And I think they are far overshadowed by sort of the creativity and cleverness in the writing and in the situations that come up and in how different characters are kind of portrayed. It's really fun reading a lot of these passages, and the way they're written, it provides a lot of theme and a lot of entertainment and a lot of color. So I really like that whole element to it. I think when you break down the gameplay, you are essentially walking around this map, you're doing a little pick up and deliver depending on the scenario, and you're making different narrative choices. You also get into combat. Combat is very luck-based, so it partly depends on the card draw, and it's going to depend on those dice rolls. None of that bothered me. The game didn't feel super clunky mechanically. There are ways to mitigate the luck. You can get better gear, you can explore for more resources. The more resources that you have and the better gear you have, the more you're going to not be at the mercy of the RNG gods. But everything kind of flowed, everything worked well together. So once you play through a few of the scenarios and you get used to, the movement and the various mechanics of the game, and you sort of understand how to get better weapons and when to heal and when to repair, it sort of becomes an efficiency puzzle and a little bit of resource management. So when you're kind of running out of stuff, you'll know, oh, I need to do more exploring, or, oh, I need to go into a city and do some bartering and maybe get some more weapons. So that is kind of what the gameplay comes down to. But really, it's so rooted in the story itself and in those choices that you're making. And I think it really lives or dies with those passages and how well written or not they are. And in this game, I think that they are very, very well written, and they form just this very immersive, heavily thematic, super fun experience. Now, this game is a second edition, and I think the first edition was only published in Poland, and I'm not sure that there was even an English edition of it. I'm very sure that it was never available here in the United States. The second edition is really the first chance for Americans to own this game. And I'm sure there were some component upgrades and stuff like that as well. It was on Kickstarter. So I know there were some miniatures in the original game. There's miniatures in this game. But there's a lot of different components that kind of come in depending on the scenario. You've also got those nice little plastic bits for the ammo and the meds and the fuel. And I think that probably was not in the original game. It was probably tokens or something like that. But I like the package. I like the way the whole thing comes together. Now, there's a lot of content in the box. There's a lot of characters. There's different vehicles. You can mix and match that. There's a lot of weapons you can buy. There's all the scenarios, the branching story paths. There's a lot in that box. Yet it doesn't feel super bloated. It's not this kind of Kickstarter where you're getting with like 8 different boxes and you've got to figure out how to, put it all together and how to store it. You have everything you need and it fits very well, actually very well, into that box. So I think in that sense, that's another kind of win in the column for Waste Knights. It gives you a lot of gameplay, it gives you a lot of variability, and it does it without just a tremendous amount of glut and expense on top of it. Now, I like the components. I think the plastic bits are nice. I think all of the cardboard works really well. It's got the miniatures with the bases. Everything is as nice as it needs to be. I'm sure someone might come into this and say, oh, it could be produced even at a higher level and you could throw all this other stuff into it. And yes, that may be true. But what they've done here is kind of cut costs in some ways, production-wise, while still delivering this game with all of this content. And I think that's where the customer really wins. Now, I personally am very excited to get back to this game and play through a lot of these scenarios. It's calling to me. I like the world. I like the way that the stories are told. And everything about these stories, to me, are very compelling and something that I want to just go back to, experience. If I play a scenario once and I do kind of, some of the different sub-scenarios in it, I'm always really excited to go back and see the rest of it. As I said at the top, this is just a first impressions video, so I haven't played it enough to give it a full review, but I can say right now, at this point in time, I have given this an 8.5 for my personal rating. Could go up, could go down later as I play it more, but right now, after a couple of games, it's an 8.5. And this may change as well because I have a bunch of games left to play from 2020 before I put out my top 25 2020 list. But right now, at this point in time, it is sitting at number 5 on my list between Dune Imperium, which is above it, and Fossilis, which is below it. So that's kind of where it is right now. I mean, that's a good slot, and an 8.5 I feel is a good rating. Now, it could go up. I could see myself rating it a 9 even. It could go down. I think it'll just depend when I play more of the scenarios and kind of get deeper into it and have more experience with it, how I feel the repetitiveness is at that time. But as I said, from what I've seen so far, it feels like there's a lot of variability in there. And I think there'll be a lot of game that can be played before this thing needs to be retired or set aside for a while. Because this game does focus so much on exploration and kind of moving around the map and making these narrative choices, it doesn't feel as much as a kind of Euro with all these heavy mechanics. And it's not a skirmish game. You're not, fighting around the map. You're not going around and kind of fighting all these fights with all these minis. It's not that either. It is this narrative storytelling game. And I think because it does kind of lean into the role playing and, you are involved in combat, you're also kind of exploring the map, but the emphasis on this really is on the role playing element. So it almost feels like, Dungeons and Dragons or another role playing game with a board. It's not all about these kind of all consuming mechanics. It's very much more about the story, having you kind of have this experience in your head that's created by your character, your choices, and the narrative elements. And I think it really, really succeeds a lot. And it has me excited to get to something like Forgotten Waters and to see how well they do with that theme. Now, I know Forgotten Waters is a little more cutesy. It has, kind of cuter art. It comes with 5 scenarios. This is, I think, more aimed at adults. It feels very adult. Some of the writing, some of the humor is very adult. It's got this kind of like post-apocalyptic theme, which is reminiscent of something like Borderlands, the video game, or in the board game world, it feels thematically similar to like Wasteland Express Delivery Service or Last Aurora, which is another game that came out last year that was also set in a post-apocalyptic world, although that game was more of a Euro game. So I really like it. I very much would recommend it to people if this is your type of game. And I think by now at this point in this video, you should know if this is your type of game, as much as I've been stressing the kind of role-playing and the narrative storytelling elements of it. If you see this around, I don't know how widely available it's going to be, but if you see it in your friendly local game shop, you may really want to consider picking this up. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really excited to keep playing it. Thank you very much for spending a few minutes watching this video. I hope it provided some worth to you. And if it's your first time here, please consider liking and subscribing the video. And you can always hit that alarm bell if you want to be notified whenever I publish content in the future. So have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.